Hello, classmates. My name is Victor Anaya. This is my presentation on the Korean War. It started June 25, 1950. The Korean War was a war that was short but caused major casualties, with more than 5 million dead and thousands wounded. The end of the Second World War was a sigh of relief for many, not just the United States, but for many around the world. When Japan fell during the Second World War, Korea was part of the Japanese Empire throughout the first half of the 20th century, and I was suddenly free. This is a war that was all started between the Soviet Union and the United States. The United States wanted to encourage democracy, while Soviets wanted to expand their idea of communist into Korea. This war was known as proxy war. Proxy war is a war that occurs when one or more opposing powers instigate a war and then uses third parties to fight on their behalf. Other examples are Afghanistan and the Vietnam War. The United States will get involved in this war, for they saw this as an attempt of the Soviet Union to launch their efforts to launch international communist takeover. This is a war that, although an armistice was signed to cease fire, a peace treaty was never signed. The president at the time of South Korea refused to accept the division between both Koreas. These are key terms that I used during my presentation. June 15, 1950. North Korean People's Army invades the South across the 30th parallel, sending over 135,000 soldiers to invade the neighboring country, Republic of Korea. It's it's clearly outnumbered, and it's not ready to go to defend against such invasion. They did not have an effective anti-weapons field artillery or isn't ready to combat any attacks through the airstrikes. Would suffer. The North Koreans are successful in the invasion and enter the South Korean capital of Seoul on June 28, 1950. The first battle between the United States and North Korea will take place at 24th Infantry Division's Task Force Smith, a combat team deployed from Japan in order to delay any advancement from North Korea near Osan. Heavily outnumbered and not properly equipped, Task Force is only able to delay the North Koreans for a short period before being forced to retreat after suffering heavy casualties. An amphibious assault at Incheon from X-Corp Seoul's Port City. Douglas MacArthur, General of the Army, Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations Force, planned to liberate Seoul and crush the North Koreans between X-Corps and 8th Army. Its breakout from the Pusan perimeter on September 16, 1950. 8th Army goes on to seize Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, after the United Nations forced the shift from defending the South Korean to destructing the North Korean regime. During this time, X-Corps has been withdrawn from Seoul to land in northeastern Korea. The North Koreans can mount only very limited and generally ineffective opposition. Two groups commanded by the Chinese people attack and defeat outnumbered United Nations forces in North Korea, causing heavy casualties. The People's Republic of China intervened to prevent the complete destruction of the North Korean regime and establishment of a united American ally, Korea, on its border. The 8th Army breaks all contact with Chinese after the attacks and retreats into South Korea. X-Corps is withdrawn to South Korea, where it joins the 8th Army by sea. The 2nd Infantry and the 1st Marine Division's heroic effort is Chosin Reservoir battle, two significant battles that would occur during this time. The majority of U.S. and United Nations forces managed to survive these battles with the Chinese, The retreat from North Korea, significant defeat of Allied forces. UN forces go on and evacuate Seoul after the Chinese and North Korea launch another major offensive attack. 8th Army broke contact with the enemy and withdrew to a new defensive line south of the Han River, anti-South Korean territory. 8th Army began a counterattack while relying on a superior force and inflicting heavy casualties on the enemy. After defeating another major attack in February, the counteroffensive continues. 8th Army takes advantage of there being little resistance in Seoul and go on to retake it. 8th Army continues its attack and reaches 38th parallel. Enemy resistance continues to be light, but intelligence indicates to them that the Chinese are planning another major attack and are getting their forces ready. General MacArthur is relieved of his duties by President Truman after MacArthur continued to question President Truman's strategy for war publicly. This affected President Truman in a major way. Back home, for the Americans saw MacArthur as a war hero, and many Americans questioned the controversial decision this would cause for Truman's public opinion to plummet. Chinese sent out another major offense, forcing the outnumbered 8th Army to make withdrawals. Both the North Korean and Chinese units are decimated by superior UN firepower in the months of April and May. This would go on to be the last attempt by either side to win the war by inflicting a crushing battlefield defeat on the enemy. 8th Army assumed the active defense as the United Nations objectives in the armistice negotiation. By this time, the war has not become extremely unpopular and therefore rule out any major offensive attacks that would or may have caused a high casualty number. UN forces will hold the main line of resistance, which were protected by fortified outposts, whom they had units patrolled and conducted raids against enemy oppositions. The Chinese attacked the 2nd Infantry Division and take outposts, and the attack that demonstrates the Chinese expanded artillery forced the 2nd Infantry Division launch several unsuccessful attacks to regain the post before finally retaking it. Patrolling will go on to become one of the most common form of combat over the next year. The Chinese would attempt to pressure the United Nations at the armistice negotiations by inflicting heavy casualties on UN units with attacks on outposts. The battle for White Horse Mountain, the successful defense of this position by the Republic of Korea 9th Division with the assistance of the United States. Republic of Korea will go on to showcase their great improvements with artillery and airstrikes against heavy Chinese attacks. Armistice negotiations resume between both sides, although both South and North Koreans still desire to defeat each other and unify the peninsula. The UN and the PRC wish to already end what has become an expensive and bloody war, whose objective, the status quo antebellum, is for the not worth the cost of continuing this never-ending war. An agreement has been reached at armistice negotiations on repatriation of prisoners of war. Will have the option to choose whether they will be repatriated, and each side will be allowed to attempt to persuade its POWs to choose whether to repatriate or not. Armistice is signed at Panmunjom. Both North and South Korea withdraw slightly to create a demilitarized zone between the two regiments. Korean War casualties: 600,000 Chinese military members died. Nearly 37,000 American soldiers were killed. At least 1 million South Korean civilians were killed. 7,000 Korean military members died. 406,000 North Korean soldiers and 600,000 civilians were killed. Although not yet signed, it is expected for a peace treaty to be signed by both Koreas in the near future, nearly 70 years after the war started. Thank you.